Kata and shadow boxing are not actually the same thing. Usually that's just what karate folk tell you when they think they know how to fight, but they don't actually. And that's not to say that kata isn't useful. I do think kata is useful. In fact, I teach kata. I don't practice kata though. Personally, I think there's like levels of advancedness that come with taking martial arts and practicing martial arts. I see kata as more like homework. Yeah, more like homework. And to make this video as cool as possible, I brought in some of my martial arts buddies to help me explain the difference between kata and shadow boxing.
Kata is simply a Japanese word that means pattern, form, or shape, and is not exclusive to the martial arts. Living in Japan, I vividly remember there were kata for how to place your shoes at the entrance of a house. There are kata for how to eat your food, and there's even kata for how to speak to people. It simply means a predetermined correct way of doing something. In other words, the number one rule of any kata in Japan is that it must not be changed. And today, kata has become a solo exercise in itself, practiced for many things like improved coordination, balance, and visualization skills. But that was not its original purpose.
Now, the karate nerd will further explain what he's talking about in a second, but first, let's go back to that homework thing I was talking about. For me, kata is more like homework, but when you just get started taking martial arts. So kind of like the homework where your teacher was teaching you how to write, and they would put the word, and then they would have the dotted lines where you have to rewrite the word. And then you put the word, and you have to rewrite the word. But kata's to the point where you like have sentences. Where shadow boxing is something more like a sentence that you came up with on your own. Sort of like you're writing a paragraph rather than repeating a paragraph. Shadow boxing is a free-flowing style of techniques which is you envisioning you're fighting someone else. So I'm throwing jabs and I'm throwing crosses. Usually shadow boxing is designed for you to be envisioning you fighting one other person that is consenting to kind of do the same thing that you're doing. Sparring, usually. You know, you're envisioning a fight, you're envisioning something. Where kata is usually made up of techniques that are more self-defense based. Somebody grabbed a hold of you, you go wrist lock and then back fist. Somebody grabbed a hold of you from the back, you step behind, take down. And sometimes they're just punches and katas, sometimes they're outside blocks, wrist releases, things of that nature. But they're more non-consensual fighting based with their techniques. Now the reason that I would teach kata to beginners but not practice it myself is because of that homework assessment. Like I think that it's more like homework. It's something that I know that if I give you this set number of things, there's no excuse for you not to practice it because you know what to do. You know what comes next. You know that if once you're done, you do it over again. Once you're done, you do it over again. And by doing this, I can like force you to work on balance, timing, breathing, good stances, movement between those stances, whatever it is that is inside that kata. If you don't have that level of knowledge yet, and I send you home to shadow box, it's going to look something like this. Kick. 1, 2. And it's going to end up looking more like kata. So with kata with beginners, what happens is they tend to practice it not thinking of doing these moves to someone else, but just repeating, which is an important step in learning of anything. The repetition is huge. Kata is great for enforcing that repetition. You don't enforce anything in shadow boxing other than movement, sorta. You can stand here and shadow box. Just like you could spar a whole round without throwing a punch. Like you could shadow box for a full round without doing anything important. You can't necessarily do kata for a whole round without doing anything important.
So what about the kata of martial arts? Well, believe it or not, a kata was actually not meant to be done solo originally. You see, it is nothing but a mnemonic device, which is a fancy word for a memory technique of reinforcing and improving lessons you should already have learned against an aggressive attacker. Today, we put the cart before the horse. We learn a solo form and then try to reverse engineer what the functional application might be. But originally, you learned self-defense first, and then you practice that in a solo form. Unfortunately, many of these practical applications have been lost in the sands of time. In the words of the legendary Funakoshi Gichin, kata is one thing, but a real fight is another.
Now, one of the things that I like to do most is make analogies. Let's say that you play basketball. Basketball is like one of the most popular sports, right? Right now, for sure. You know basketball, the one with the ball and the hoop, you know? At the most advanced state of basketball, you're playing a game. Like, that's the most advanced it can be. There's referees, there's whistles, there's fouls. The most advanced state you are playing in front of people. The wildest it can get. That is being in a fight, whether it be sanctioned fight in the backyard, like that is the peak level of advancedness. Now take one step down, pick up basketball at the rec, you know, you're playing with your buddies at the Y. That, in the equivalent of martial arts, is sparring. There's nothing on the line, you're just getting better or enjoying yourself. Now, let's go to the most basic level of advancement when it comes to basketball. Shooting, literally just standing there, doing the same thing over and over again. That's the same as like old school karate. Everybody standing in one line. 1, kia, 2, kia, 3, kia. So now let's go one level below like pickup basketball. For me, one level below playing with another person in a super relaxed type of basketball game would be shooting around by yourself. Like you're driving to the hoop and then you get the rebound because it missed and then you turn and you take another shot. You can have goals in mind, but like you can also pull up, you can take 3-point shots, you can do layups. If you've ever shot around, you've done this. That's shadow boxing. And if you want to get even more technical, you could argue that taking the ball away is shadow boxing and putting the ball in is that same type of bag work. That's not important. Now, the equivalent of kata in basketball practice would be like if you put a rack full of balls in like 4 or 5 different locations and you made a conscious effort. Okay, I'm gonna shoot 3 first until I'm out. I'm gonna come up here and I'm gonna do layups, 4 of them, boom, boom, boom. And you go through that whole process and you stick to that routine over and over and over again. Now, if you did that alone, you would be a better shooter, but you wouldn't be good at basketball. You wouldn't be good at moving around and doing specific things that are basketball related. Now, if you're doing the shadow boxing equivalent of shooting around, it's kind of random, you're used to moving around, you're probably burning a couple more calories, and you're also training your mind that it's not always the same thing over and over and over again. It's not always, okay, you get a second to breathe, go, right? Doesn't make you a great basketball player, but it makes you one step closer than the kata. So essentially what I'm getting to is kata is way more like drilling than shadow boxing is. Shadow boxing is not drilling. Shadow boxing is implementing what you learned into a non-specific format, like a non-structured thing. Let's give you one more analogy before we're done.
So there's plenty of similarities between katas and shadow boxing, right? It's your time to master your technique in your strikes and your defense. It's your time to work on your balance, your footwork, your timing of when to tense certain muscles, even your visualization. You should be visualizing when you do katas, you know, someone standing in front of you. The main difference, I would say, is if you were to do shadow boxing in the sand versus a kata in the sand, when you look down at the end, the footprints are going to be completely different, right? If you were to do a kata in the sand at the end, you're probably going to have a very clear shape, like a capital I. Whereas if you do shadow boxing and you look down, your feet are going to be all over the place, right? You were pretty much just moving with your opponent within a squared perimeter. All right, so that's the difference, I would say, is the freestyle aspect and the formatting of the footwork. You're not following predetermined movements like you do in a kata. With shadow boxing, instead, you're visualizing someone in front of you, you're working with them and what they're giving you, you're finding openings or creating angles, getting off the ropes, juking from side to side. So again, it's going to be much more of a freestyle when it comes to shadow boxing versus katas.
Essentially what I'm saying is do more than just kata, do more than just shadow boxing. The more you do, the more equipped that you're going to be to move on in the future of martial arts. Now, what was the purpose of this whole video? Honestly, I'm just sick of you guys commenting and saying that kata is the same thing as shadow boxing. It's way more close to like, it's solo drilling in a very specific constructed manner. Man, this is a rant of a video. I apologize, guys. Subscribe. Bang!